Stupendous. Everyone, thank you for joining us tonight on Cyber Judo. Tonight, we're going to be talking about ransomware as a service. We'll be deep diving and talking a little bit about Lockbit, particularly Lockbit 3.0 and how that compares to Lockbit 2.0 and some of the TTPs and indicators of compromise and all that kind of stuff that is associated with Lockbit. But one of the things I wanted to do is wanted to start from a 10,000 foot view perspective first on ransomware and ransomware as a service, mostly because that there are some elements I think for this that are helpful for executive management, for directors, for managers, people who are maybe in technology roles or positions and are generally familiar with the concepts, but are perhaps haven't kind of pieced together all the adjacencies associated with cybersecurity, particularly in regards to some of the defensive techniques, some of the considerations when it comes to cyber threat intelligence, right? I think that there's also in this process, as we go to chat about ransomware and ransomware as a service, some areas in where it aligns with the techniques that we try to leverage in the process of performing pen testing in combination with social engineering and trying to emulate a real adversary with the intent of breaking into an organization, gaining a foothold, performing lateral movement, privilege escalation, persistence, right? And then finally launching an attack in which it's disrupting company systems, right? And when you disrupt company systems, a lot of times you're encrypting files and whatnot, but there's even more to that because malicious actors have become more and more sophisticated. So that being said, I got my screen shared up right here and just some of the high level elements. One of the first things I want to kind of talk about is just the definition of ransomware. Everyone has a familiar concept of ransomware as malware when it infects a system or a set of systems. It prevents that system from operating appropriately, but it could be in a couple different ways. Most people are most familiar with crypto locking malware, right? Or crypto locking ransomware. So basically, once it's deployed onto us, let's say a Windows file server, what it's going to do is find all the files that are particularly important or indiscriminately all files across the file system that aren't essentially system files and start encrypting them, right? Encrypting them in which they're not easily reversibly decrypted by whomever is the owner of that particular system. Now, that is the first kind of level of what we call extortion, right? But there's actually one of the things that most people don't talk about when you start to get into maybe, let's say, like tabletop exercises, simulating a bad guy conducting a ransomware attack, which is double and triple extortion attacks. So a double extortion attack is when once a malicious actor has gained a foothold into a set of systems, before they start crypto locking or encrypting all of those files, making themselves fairly known in the environment, what they're going to do is they're going to try to sleuth around and find sensitive and important company information. Once they find that information, then what they're going to do is they're going to try to exfiltrate reasonably as much as possible while maintaining a fairly low profile. Once they have exfiltrated what they feel is a pretty good sum of sensitive company data, then what they'll do is they'll then start to encrypt files across the file system of that particular server or a set of servers or set of workstations. And by the way, this does not, the thing that's kind of scary with ransomware attacks is it doesn't always require like root access or admin access. That's the scary thing, is that you can deploy it a lot of times through a conventional user, especially, and we're going to get into this in a moment, some of the prevention techniques, if you don't have really good, let's say, access controls in place, or you don't practice the principle of least privilege, right? So if you have Windows file shares and you have a company in which, the marketing guy for some reason has access to, I don't know, HR documents, right? Well, if the marketing guy gets, compromised and his account is used to deploy ransomware, and that ransomware starts to encrypt file shares, and those drives are, let's say, mapped to the marketing guy too, those HR documents, all that kind of stuff, it's going to affect HR all alike as well, right? But anyways, that being said, so when they steal that initial set of sensitive data, that data is being exfiltrated. And what they can then use in that process is when they say, hey, we crypto locked your files, a lot of organizations have now begun, being a bit more proactive and actually backing up their systems, testing their backups too. So that's great. So a lot of times organizations will respond back, well, that's tough for you, but actually we have backups. So no, we're not going to pay your ransom. And let's just after it goes, well, actually, reverse Uno card on you here. We stole some of that data already in advance, and we're going to leak that across the internet, and we're going to destroy your reputation. We're going to make your life an absolute nightmare, because that data can be leveraged by other malicious actors to, let's say, commit like identity theft or fraud or whatever, right? And so now the customer is like, okay, well, we restored things from backup, but we really don't want them to release it to all these other malicious actors out there. Okay, let's just pay the ransom and just hope this kind of gets swept under the rug and nothing happens with it, right? Actually, I believe there was a case, and don't quote me because I am not a news authority or source on this. I'm just a random guy on the internet. But if I remember correctly, I believe there was a whole situation a couple of years back where I'm going to say it was Uber had a security incident that occurred, malicious actor stealing company data. And what they did is they kind of swept under the rug with it being a bug bounty payment. What a mighty interesting way to sweep something under the rug, like a malicious actor holding you for a ransom. But that being said, there's also one additional layer to that: triple extortion attacks, right? So again, single extortion, we have disrupted business operations. You can't get access to these files. These files are particularly important to maintain company operations and a revenue stream. Two, we've already stolen and exfiltrated some of that sensitive data. And if we leak that across the dark web or other resources and go to sell it, then what's going to occur is, identity theft and other residual impact also is going to absolutely destroy your reputation. And then three is basically just another level of extortion. Sometimes it can vary, but it's usually, well, we're going to report this to legal authorities. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep coming after you. We're going to start hitting you with denial of service attacks, right? We're going to find other areas of the holes in the Swiss cheese that you call your company. And we're just going to keep pounding the systems. We're going to keep disrupting operations, right? And we're going to keep beating you down until you pay us, right? And so that's really where the industry has been going as of late. And in preparation for like doing a little bit of like more public speaking on ransomware in general, and also this Cyber Judo session, one of the really interesting like factoids that I found was that, believe it or not, the prevalence of ransomware attacks in particular, so the prevalence of ransomware attacks has actually gone down in the past couple of years. That's kind of strange, because when you hear it in the news, it kind of gives you the sensation it's happening more frequently. So what's happening there? Well, this is the thing. When looking into the statistics and the figures and looking into the numbers, it is true that the amount of attacks, right, ransomware attacks that are occurring is going down year after year after year, at least over the last 3 years. But the rate of which they've been successful in compromising an organization and leading to a ransom situation is actually been increasing. So what does that tell us? That tells us that they're not doing as many pray and spray attacks, malicious actors. What they're doing is they're focusing on being more sophisticated and upping their game, right? So what they're trying to do is be more sophisticated in their techniques in regards to getting a foothold into the organization, being able to evade defenses and have a low profile within an organization, and then being more sophisticated in how they can extort businesses out of their money, because at the end of the day, these malicious actors are running businesses. And to that point, running a business, well, that's where we get into ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service is a fairly new-ish type of concept when it comes to thinking about conventional malware and viruses as a whole that a lot of people have grown up with and kind of been used to thinking about over the past 2 decades. So ransomware as a service is intriguing in the sense that it's just like software as a service and platform as a service and something being delivered as a service. So what malicious actors are now doing is they're developing applications, right? They're developing code bases, which is the ransomware software that can essentially once installed on a system can remain fairly low profile, laterally move, perform some level of privilege escalation, perform some level of data exfiltration automatically, right? And start that ransomware process or start kicking off that ransomware process. Now, if you can deliver that as a nice, neat package, right? What you could do is you could have an affiliate network, right? Not too differently than, like, I don't know, YouTuber affiliates and whatnot. Hey guys, we got this thing for you. It's a fantastic deal. You only have to pay X amount of fairly low dollars, right, to get access to our ransomware as a service application here. And go install it on things, go install it on whatever you want, right? Once it gets installed, right, and that process starts to occur and once a ransomware attack is conducted, we'll get a piece of the pie and you get a piece of the pie. How about that, right? So a lot of times when I hear in the news, people talking about particularly Lockbit, because Lockbit has been quite big in the news over the past couple of weeks when it comes to, yeah, for the low price of $39.99 a month. It's very, very similar to that conceptually. But with the prevalence of Lockbit in the news, Ion Group, they are a financial software service, software development services provider. So they provide like a lot of the components of not just software as a service and platform as a service, but also software that gets installed on people's, own company systems for, a lot of different financial industries. They're an international company. They had a particular situation where they got compromised by Lockbit, and they actually had a unfortunately successful security incident occur in which the malicious actor was able to disrupt operations, and it disrupted downstream capital markets, right? So people being able to trade and that kind of stuff. It was really, really not a fantastic situation, bit muddy. And then shortly afterwards in the news, they compromised Royal Mail as well, right? But a lot of times when I'm looking at these headlines, people are like, Lockbit hacker group. Lockbit in themselves, like, yes, that Lockbit is a group of individuals and developers, but they're not necessarily the folks who are always deploying it. They have affiliates that leverage their ransomware as a service, right? So that's one of the things that kind of, people should keep in mind is that the whole development of ransomware as a service brings down the barrier of entry for basically inexperienced attackers to deploy fairly sophisticated malware across systems. That can be quite a scary thing. And actually, one of the things that's even a bit creepier sometimes is that some of these ransomware as a service software, when they get installed against the system and they start to compromise and infect the system, they'll actually have promotional ads. Did you know that? Did anybody know any of that? Like, that was one of the things when I was like looking into like the most recent like techniques that they're leveraging and like, how people are improving ransomware as a service. These malicious actors now have advertisements, right? As almost they're incentivizing rogue employees, right, to deploy this type of software across systems. Quirky, huh? So again, the main difference between regular ransomware and ransomware as a service is ransomware as a service is a completely different business model. It's a business model that scales a bit more because it concentrates developers focusing on sophisticated software that's easy to deploy to a lot of affiliates, and those affiliates can be inexperienced individuals, have very little cybersecurity expertise, and all they need to do is get it installed on a couple company systems or one company system or leveraging one user account, right? And then it can kind of metastasize from there, right? So one of the things I've been generally asked about is like, hey, once ransomware gets installed on a system, like, what happens then next, and I'm not going to beat a dead horse too much here with you guys, but, in a nutshell, gaining a foothold to the system, the lateral movement, the persistence, the privilege escalation, the data exfiltration is a really important component, right? And then the ransomware deployment. I don't see a lot of ransomware these days not implement a data exfiltration mechanism. We're going to talk about in just a couple of moments some of the techniques and tools that blue teams can use to help detect and prevent ransomware attacks, and also kind of investigate ransomware attacks and that kind of stuff. Another thing, though, that I've been asked quite a bit about is how malicious actors are trying to evade blue teams, evade companies, and what type of techniques are they most leveraging? First and foremost, particularly when it comes to Windows, fileless malware is the way to go about it. I will say that at least in my own experience and what I have seen, about 80% of the security incidents that I've been involved in doing forensic analysis on in the past, and about 80% of the situations in which I've been able to compromise a set of Windows systems is usually through PowerShell. Wowee, people are really poor at securing systems and users from getting access to PowerShell and being able to run things like unsigned scripts, right? And what's even worse with PowerShell is while you may be able to do something in PowerShell initially that could be, let's say, detected by endpoint detection response software, or anti-malware software, because it looks like you're, I don't know, downloading malware, let's say with wget, with PowerShell, or you're using PowerShell to create a reverse shell outbound and that kind of stuff. You can obfuscate it fairly easily, right? And once you start to obfuscate a lot of your PowerShell scripts and code, signature detection goes right out the window. Booyah, right? And it becomes a lot more difficult for some of this EDR and anti-malware software to actually understand the behavior of what's going to occur once that script gets executed appropriately, right? So again, fileless, that's usually the way to go when you're compromising systems, particularly Windows systems. So, I've even had it where I talk to some people who claim to be cybersecurity experts, and they'll talk about file integrity management all day long. Like that's going to be their savior. Like, well, it's not going to do anything for you if there's no files hitting the file system, Another one is using legitimate software tools that are used by blue teams themselves and IT departments. Hey, you want to know something that was really interesting that I kind of saw in the news? So ransomware being deployed by malicious actors who use some of the same software that we use to conduct our pen testing and social engineering engagements. ConnectWise Control, also known as Screen Connect. Malicious actors love that software. It's a fantastic software too. Doesn't get detected by antivirus or anything like that. And usually we call that type of stuff when it's installed on a system that's not supposed to really be there as PUA, but potentially unwanted applications, right? But they don't get really detected that well. Same thing with PuTTY being installed on a system. You use PuTTY to also set up reverse shells and whatnot, make your life a little bit easier, when you're breaking into an environment and establishing persistence, right? Your conventional things like also TeamViewer and all that. So using the same tools that the IT department has to leverage and utilize to maintain the environment against them is a fantastic technique for getting a foothold into an environment, being able to move across the environment and be under the radar and perform privilege escalation and lateral movement. That is actually one of the reasons why once we gain like a foothold into like a particular user's account while we're doing our own pen testing engagements, I don't say, okay, guys, let's just run like Bloodhound against everything. Let's just like set it all on fire. Well, because like if I run obvious malicious scripts, right, they're going to generate a lot of obvious behavior of like, let's say, I don't know, hundreds of logins or attempted logins across systems for one or two user accounts, that's going to get detected, right? Usually we'll try to take the approach of like, hey, you know what, let me just continue to tiptoe around and just RDP into every little system, as a user and just kind of see what's going on, help myself, and take a look around. Oh, look, this sysadmin or this user just happened to save a lot of sensitive credentials or something like that to their desktop. How fantastic of them. Really appreciate that. And then number 3 is a lot of ransomware is using multiple payloads across systems now. So it's not using just one conventional payload that's being deployed. Usually it can be obfuscated and it could be leveraging other tools. Cobalt Strike is a big one that gets leveraged by malicious actors nowadays, right? So a lot of Cobalt Strike payloads, so that goes beyond, beyond your, typical Metasploit payloads, right? And then, you got Cobalt Strike mixed with, some, PowerShell mixed with some Python scripts, so on and so forth, right? And see what kind of works, right? So it can go in through an execution chain, right? Attempting particular, let's say, privilege escalation attack or persistence, or establishing persistence. And if it doesn't work, right, then it continues to move down a set of payloads. So again, that's just, something to generally keep in mind there. Um, now, now that we understand the difference between generally ransomware and ransomware as a service, I want to provide just some high level prevention recommendations that I know almost everyone here is going to be like, duh, but believe it or not, some of the fundamentals get lost on people. And I speak to technology and cybersecurity professionals all the time where these fundamentals are not really being practiced that well. And I'm going to just deep dive a little bit into a couple of them. So, comprehensive incident response plan. Yeah, you would not believe how many times I encounter organizations that process many tens of millions of dollars in revenue that do not have a really cohesive incident response plan. Or they'll have an incident response plan that's all fluff. It's cloud fluff, right? It's just this bubbly language of like, it's important to have an incident response planning. Let me give you a definition of what an incident is. Let me give you a definition of this and that and that. You're, okay, but where's the actual plan? They'll mix their incident response plan and policy all together in this gobbledygook. And he's like, this is like 40 pages of fluff language. Nobody's going to be able to leverage this when there's an incident. Nobody can read through 40 pages when there's an incident. You should have an incident response policy and a plan. They should usually be separate. If you want to keep them together, then just make sure it's short and to the point, right? Which is, hey, we're the first people you're calling up and notifying when that occurs, right? And then everything else should follow, for the most part, a set of procedural bullet points, right? Another thing that for some reason a lot of organizations forget when they write their incident response plan is they don't think about if they have cyber insurance already or not. Hey, you got a cyber insurance, you're going to want to integrate whatever it says in your cyber insurance policy, because there's always stipulations of what you should be doing in your cyber insurance policy in your incident response plan. Because if you don't follow whatever they're telling you, then your cyber insurance company might come back to you, especially if you have a claim, right, and tell you, no, we're not going to pay that. So be just very considerate of that, right? And that should be one of your first contacts, right? I would also say that if you have cybersecurity insurance, they usually will say, hey, listen, you're supposed to call this number. We have our own incident response team. Do not call any other companies or firms up whatsoever. Pay cyber insurance, do nothing. So you know what, Dennis? That is that's a funny joke you got there.
I've run into that. That's not a joke.
That's the thing. So I don't sell cyber insurance or anything like that. I know a couple of good cyber insurance folks and whatnot, but what's really interesting with the statistics, and now I'm getting tons of questions about it. Businesses saying, I can't get cyber insurance, or that my cyber insurance has increased 300%. The reason being is that you're right. In the past, I would say last basically 7 years, a lot of organizations, as part of their business as usual risk management strategy, you just get, okay, let me slap $25,000 on a cyber incident plan. Okay. And does it give you coverage for everything, right? Does it cover damages? And can we just pay the ransom? Okay. The checkbox is there. And these would be organizations that have no cybersecurity program. They're completely oblivious to any type of real security controls. Those organizations have ruined it for everyone else, because those organizations got hacked and they paid the ransom. And all these insurance companies realize that their cyber insurance policies are not very profitable for them. At the end of the day, they have to run a business, which means that there has to be some profit margin in it. If they're always paying out all these ransoms, then it's not going to work out too well. So now cyber insurance companies have wised up quite a bit. So one, you're getting a cyber policy, I will tell you what, they're going to give you a nice, thorough DDQ. It's going to be a little bit like a colonoscopy. And in that process, they're going to expect you to have some fundamental components of a cybersecurity program in place. And if you don't, they're not going to give you insurance, right? It's just like you would never, ever give car insurance to somebody who doesn't have a driver's license. Who figured? So really important element there. And then you better make sure that you're actually following and executing on whatever you say you're saying to the cyber insurance company in regards to, these are our policies, these are our processes, this is what we're attesting to. Because when they go to send in their incident response team, they go take a look around and figure out what the bad guy did and whatnot. They're also going to take a look to see if you have those security controls actually established and in place. And so if you say, yeah, we do regular vulnerability scanning on all of our systems, external and internal, to identify any threats to our systems, and then malicious actor breaks into your organization because you chose to put your company workstations directly on the internet with RDP open, Once the incident response team sees that, they're going to go, yeah, no, we're not gonna pay for that. No, because you weren't following what you said you were gonna do, right? And by the way, that scenario that I just talked about was a real scenario that I encountered about 2 years ago. Yes, there are people who put company workstations directly on the internet with remote desktop protocol open and ready to authenticate. And better yet, those are individuals who call themselves IT people. Funny, right? Anyways, so that being noted, and then cybersecurity insurance has just generally spiked through the roof in regards to the costs. There's a lot of debate in the regulatory domain of actually making it illegal for organizations to pay for the pay ransoms, which, is a contentious debate and topic. And I'm not going to kind of dive too much into it. Generally, I fall on the side of it should be illegal to pay the ransom. The fact of the matter is that when you pay the ransom, you're incentivizing a black market for those things to occur, right? It's simple. You should have had the security controls in place the first time around, and you got the backups too, right? And you should be, in my opinion, like cybersecurity risk management should be at the same table as every other component of risk management for businesses nowadays. If you are negligent and you didn't care about it, then you should be held liable to it. That's my opinion. Maybe that's a little bit aggressive for some people, but at the end of the day, you're incentivizing malicious actors otherwise, which hurts everybody else, particularly the consumers. Every time a data breach occurs, don't worry, you can sign up for free monitoring. How about that? Yeah, there's this thing though. You can't change my social security number too easily. So giving me 1 free year credit reporting and monitoring doesn't really do a whole lot for a lifetime of pain. If you could only make it a little bit easier for me to get a new social security number or something like that, or just happen to use magic to wipe my information from the darknet, that would be fantastic. But anyways, incident response plan, need to have one, even if it's a bullet checklist. Keep it to the point, make sure it can be followed very quickly and effectively, have the updated contact information there all the time. Implement appropriate network segregation. Still, organizations are not segregating devices and systems based on, hey, each one of these zones and these VLANs should be really associated with what's the function of the devices that are on that particular VLAN and zone, and what's the sensitivity of the data of those systems that are on that particular VLAN or zone. Honestly, while you shouldn't just rely on network segregation principles on its own, it really helps contain a security incident to a very specific domain in which it started, right? The wildfire can be then contained and be easily more treated and cause a lot less damage. Implement real privilege access management, right? So follow a real principle of least privilege model. I've seen many multi-billion-dollar organizations not be able to just secure Windows file shares, in which, hey, these Windows file shares, they have your QuickBooks, they have your tax documents, they have your human resources documents with everyone's social security numbers. And did you know, by golly gee, everyone is set as not just read, but also for change and execution permissions on the entire file system and on this file share. Perhaps we should change that. Maybe you should audit that on a regular basis. If an organization is not going back and auditing across the entirety of your Active Directory environment, the Windows file sharing permissions, so every SMB file share, and is it set to everyone or is it set to specific groups? If you're not auditing that, then likely you're not following a good principle of least privilege. That's where it starts really from the get-go. Same thing with OneDrive and file shares now and all that kind of stuff too. And then obviously being able to monitor for a bit of that. Implementing multi-factor authentication, still a lot of organizations aren't doing it, but I'm going to add just a little bit more to it. And like I was discussing last week, additional location context is always helpful. Number matching on your push notifications is going to help prevent successful social engineering attacks. They're not foolproof by any means, but they'll really help. And then implement impossible travel notifications for unusual user logins, right? So this way you can detect an unusual user login and go investigate it. And the faster you're able to detect the incident, the faster you're going to be able to contain the malicious actor in this security event. Implement a real security information event management solution. a lot of organizations where they just fail is the fact that they're just not collecting all their logs centrally into one place or into a couple of central locations. Start there first, pragmatically. Are you collecting the data you need for all your endpoints and facilities, right? Then from there, start to graduate to taking those logs and turning it into real actionable events that are in a dashboard. We'll talk about some SIM solutions I recommend down below in a couple moments. And then having those graduate into actionable notifications and alerts. If you have, by the way, a SIM and it has 1,000 messages in it and you're getting 1,000 notifications, that's like highlighting the entirety of an encyclopedia. It's not helpful. So less is more in that particular regard. You can collect the entire ball of wax, but don't notify on everything. Just collect as much data as possible, but don't necessarily notify on everything right from the get-go. Conduct, obviously, regular employee training. This is where a lot of people get things wrong. They always talk about end users, right? And every other person in the company besides the IT guys are absolutely naive for some reason. Although this is the funny thing, and Dane can recently attest to this because he just recently did a social engineering engagement in which he was successful. You know who's really, really bad at end user security awareness? Technical people and security people, because they think they're better than everybody else. They think they already know it. They think that it can't happen to them because they're too smart, right? A lot of IT help desks and support desks do not have any real processes in place for validating users on the other end of a phone call, right? And you can come up with a plethora of excuses. Even worse is the fact that so many help desk staff members and organizations have been conditioned by executive management to treat executive management and VIPs differently, and that those VIPs are somehow above process, right? And permitted certain exceptions. No, you need to change this right now. I got important things to do. The thing is that when VIPs don't have to follow processes, right, and they're granted exceptions that other people don't, or that other people have to go through, that means that VIPs are more likely to be compromised. And if you think about it, VIPs, their information's everywhere. They're public. They're figureheads. They're more likely to be impersonated. So you have somebody who's more likely to be impersonated because they're more visible. They're going to probably have a lot of access to things because they're an important person, and they want access or they want exceptions granted to them. Mix that with a help desk that is already overloaded, that doesn't have a process for validating human beings on the other end of a phone call, is looking for a disaster to occur. Dane, did you want to elaborate a little bit to maybe one of the incidents or one of the scenarios that you recently did?
Sure. And so I called impersonating someone from the financial department because I knew that if we were able to obtain access to this individual, we would have a plethora of juicy information that we could leverage and potentially gain access into their internal systems through this individual, because he, I think, was an account manager in the financial department. So it was simple. Just called the help desk for this organization, and I kind of, I don't know if I want to toot my own horn here, but I think I do a fairly good older person voice, because the the person that we were impersonating seemed to be a bit older. So I threw my voice a bit and was able to successfully coerce the IT help desk individual to reset the password. And it was super simple. And after a bit of MFA fatigue, we had access.
Oh, yeah. Awesome work again. Continuing on here, keep systems up to date. Hey, listen, if you can't keep systems up to date, because I understand all organizations have some level of technical debt that they're still trying to burn off, then take those systems and put them on a different VLANs and segments and then block them off, right? Contain them a little bit more then. Don't just let the old crap sit there, right? With all the nice new shiny stuff that's super important. Go quarantine it, okay? It's gross, ancient stuff that should be deprecated and shut down. So that's the backup plan. You know, if you have old software, old systems that you really can't get rid of, the organization still needs to stay on it, then put it to its own zone. Put it to its own zone and make it a pain in the, just slightly, just enough, slightly pain in the butt for the rest of the organization to use it, right? This way they realize, wow, you know, this is really slow and a pain in the butt to access. We should probably find a new solution. Yeah, that's a great idea. So endpoint protection solutions, by the way, using what's built into Windows by default, I don't consider a solution, right? Unless you are actually using Windows Defender, ATP, or whatever Microsoft now calls it, I think Defender for endpoints, right? The actual enterprise version of it, then it's not, I mean, it can do some level of things, but the thing is it's not centralized, right? You can't configure policies across the board. You can't centralize the alerting and notifications, right? And the logging, the containment mechanisms, right? It's going to just block the most veneer of attack vectors, right? Also, by the way, Defender for endpoint, we actually leverage it and utilize it in-house. I'm kind of less stoked about Microsoft nowadays, because one of the things I found out about Lockbit 3.0 in particular is one of their evasion techniques is hijacking Defender for endpoint to deploy itself. That's crazy. Thanks, Microsoft. So, and then backup critical data, and make sure you test your backups, develop a recovery plan. You know, something that I've seen a lot of, so organizations are now doing that. They have backups, they're testing their backups and that kind of stuff now. But why do you put your backups in the same Active Directory environment on the same VLAN and network segment as all your other production systems? The bad guy's going to go and destroy the backup server, right? Make sure that your backups are not accessible through the regular production access means and whatnot. Make sure that you have your backups in a way where when it's being backed up, that it can't be tampered with, right? So that's the element of the integrity of the data, right? Yeah, operations might be down for some period of time. The initial server might, be completely borked, right? And you have an availability issue, but it's a whole nother magnitude of problems if you don't have backups with integrity to them. So that's just a really important concept of making sure malicious actors can't actually tamper with the backups. We've done, by the way, a lot of ransomware tabletop simulation exercise and that kind of stuff where, we kind of jump into things that way. I'll just have a very brief tangent here of reports. This is me not upselling, by the way. I'm not upselling anyone on this. I'm just showing you guys a little bit of like when we do like ransomware assessments on people's systems and whatnot, what we'll do is we'll actually map out the environment almost like this is a jawbreaker, right? Like, hey, here's your external and internal network infrastructure, internal servers, underlying network compute infrastructure, backup infrastructure, and then BCDR infrastructure. So if a malicious actor really wants to commit a full-scale ransomware attack where they're able to not just disrupt operations, but destroy the backups and the integrity of the backups, right? They got to really go through all these components, all these different layers of the defense and depth posture that exist. You know what I mean? But again, a lot of times when we do these tabletop exercises, someone will say, hey, yeah, we got all the best backups in the world, don't we? Yeah, you do. But you still didn't deal with that data exfiltration thing, though. You didn't detect the data being stolen from your environment. So you're going to still get that double extortion attack, even if you're able to restore from backup. So just a note there. So continuing forward here, helpful open source tools, OSSec, pretty good, kind of classic, a host-based intrusion detection system / security information event management solution. My particular favorite, by the way, is Waza. Waza is a fork of OSSec with a little bit more added onto it with like OS query and a couple other modules. It's very centric. One of the things I love about Waza is it has a ton of integrations with cloud platforms like Azure and AWS by default, right? It also has a ton of connectors for things like Docker containers, right? And microservices. So I kind of find that Waza, while it's still kind of complex to kind of deploy and manage and whatnot, I find that it's a superior solution to OSSec, right? Snort, Brozeek, Circata, everyone generally is familiar with leveraging those and utilizing those in one way or another for network intrusion detection and also traffic analysis. I'm not going to jump too much into those right now. YARA rules. YARA rules are for detecting indicators of compromise on systems and fingerprinting those signatures. And as from a like a forensic analysis standpoint and from a incident response standpoint. Process hacker for looking at, processes on Windows systems, very Windows centric, obviously. MISP, this is a truly open source intelligence sharing platform and exchange to share indicators of compromise amongst organizations. There is a Waza, or there is a plugin for MISP with Waza, and the Hive, which is a security information event manager or a security incident response platform, which is pretty good if you're like building your own like open source internal SOC for your organization, right? Kept it open source. There's tons of fantastic commercial solutions out there, but I'm not going to kind of really beat a dead horse on that. What I do want to talk about is, okay, malicious actors, right? What are the actual techniques and tactics that they are deploying, these ransomware malicious actors in an environment? And so what I started to do was do a little bit of research, because everything is moving closer and closer to the MITRE ATT&CK framework for being able to really essentially, understand what a malicious actor is doing to gain access to an organization, perform lateral movement, exfiltrate data, so on and so forth. And then you can then try to emulate that for your red teams and for your purple teams, right? And so it's very systematic. That's what I think everyone really loves about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's very systematic and very practical to kind of gravitate towards. And so those TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, really tactics, just kind of more high level, goals and objectives that a malicious actor is going to have as they're trying to gain access to our systems, exfiltrate data, so on and so forth, right? Techniques are those more specific methods and tools that are going to be leveraged in the process to exploit various vulnerabilities or weaknesses that they find, be it technical or human-based, right? And then procedures are more at the specific step by step, like if you're executing a set of scripts across the system, right? And you're using these very specific tools in a very specific, order, right? As you're gaining access to a system or performing some other task, right? So took the time to really kind of break down. Most ransomware kind of follow this. This is a little bit more specific to particularly Lockbit, because that's the thing that everyone's been talking about, at least in my little domain, for a while now. So initial access with, people will say, well, how do you get infected by Lockbit? And the thing I always then reply back with is, well, it depends on the affiliate. Again, it could be an unsophisticated affiliate, but a lot of the affiliates, what we've been seeing is usually it's the general phishing, and then you got this exploit public facing application and drive-by compromise. Usually, it's somebody having RDP open and brute forcing RDP, spear phishing, and a pseudo 0 day. When I say pseudo 0 day, a true 0 day is unknown to the public, right? And is being leveraged by a malicious actor. I say pseudo 0 day as, oh, we just, everyone in the security community finds out about this new vulnerability and weaknesses that's being leveraged in the wild by malicious actors, but we're generally aware and we have to respond very, very quickly to update systems or implement some other prevention mechanisms. Like there was just this big VMware ESXi, I think ESXi ARGS, vulnerability, that's been exploited by malicious actors. Last year, another a really big set of pseudo 0 days, was the Microsoft server vulnerabilities and weaknesses that allowed malicious actors to perform remote code execution attacks and set up, persistent reverse proxies on systems. So it can really quite vary a bit, right? Sometimes purely technical, sometimes the social engineering element. I would say though, conventionally, it's going to be a little bit more of the social engineering, because at least statistically speaking, 70 to 80% of security incidents involve human beings. That's just what the reports show. Execution across PowerShell, CLI, scripting, scheduled tasks, persistent through scheduled tasks, registry manipulation, and creating new services, privilege escalation by bypassing user access controls, exploiting privilege escalation, hooking into services, and then service registry permission weaknesses, which is services like having unquoted service paths, services that are running as an administrator, but those services actually have a binary that allows anybody to change the binary, like you can rewrite it, so then you can have the binary do something malicious that's for you. So you just got to rewrite it, that kind of stuff. So by the way, this is all on our regular Cyber Judo site, so everyone can see it. So you can go to regular training content and videos and introductory guide about ransomware here. So just want to call that if everyone's like, oh, hey, you're hitting on things too high level. Well, I got probably 10 minutes left here, and there's a lot that I put in here.
I'm pretty sure that either Kaspersky, by the way, or Avast had that same scheduled task vulnerability as a side note.
Oh yeah, of course. That is one of the quirky things sometimes about, again, malware is anti-malware controls is anti-malware controls can very frequently have a vulnerability that the malicious actors then leveraging on themselves. Actually, here, I got a really good one here. I'm going to post this in the chat. I really like this. This comes from the Department of Health and Human Services, but I feel that they I don't feel like this is a healthcare information technology issue, right? They did just a good write-up for, you know, healthcare organizations, but I think this is really going to be applied to any organization. You know, there's a very high level breakdown. They provide a couple of specific CVE references and, you know, how they do obfuscation, some of the things that Lockbit 3.0 does in particular. They keep it high level while at the same time providing a bit of insight, and then having tons of great references, which I actually have loaded up here. And, you know, perhaps in a future session, we'll get to do more malware reverse engineering and analysis and whatnot. But one of the things that was really interesting was the fact that in some of the documentation that I was looking through, it was talking about leveraging Windows Defender or Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And another interesting quirk here, by the way, with Lockbit is a lot of people say, hey, is this a Russian malware group or hacker group? No, it's not directly state sponsored, at least in my knowledge, you know, and that's not to say a lot, because it's not like I hang out with these guys or anything like that, or I have any evidence to say in either case. But there's not a whole lot of evidence that says that there's a direct monetary connection. It's mostly the state is involved in knowing about it and turning a blind eye, right? So these malicious actors, they can operate within, let's say, Russia, right, or, you know, other, you know, states like Iran and North Korea and that kind of stuff. And generally, those state actors won't care to do anything about prosecuting those malicious actors or hunting them down, as long as they're not disrupting, you know, that country, right? Or disrupting individuals within that country or businesses within that country. And, you know, I'm going to take a brief moment to kind of go off into an interesting tangent here. And again, there's a lot of fantastic content I put to you forward for you guys here. So there's, you know, stuff that we can jump back into, or even if we don't get to it, it's not going to kill us. No worries. It's out there. It's already been created. But if you have these languages installed on your computer, Lockbit will not fully execute. When Lockbit starts to execute on a system, it's going to see if any of these languages are installed on the system being leveraged by the user. And if any of those languages are installed, it will not continue the CryptoLocker process or the data exfiltration process. So this is what I wanted to get into attention of. Would it be an effective recommendation to tell organizations to go install these language packs on their systems? Think about that for a second. Now, someone might say, wait, you're telling me I should install Russian, the Russian language on my server. Well, listen, just because there's another, the Russian language is installed on your server doesn't mean the language has malware in it, okay? Don't be a xenophobic person here or anything like that, okay? Think about that. Is that a strange recommendation? Is there a problem with that recommendation? I was going through it through my head, Dennis. What are your thoughts?
Personally, I don't. So I don't think it's a long-term solution by any means, obviously. However,
it's a gimmick. It is a gimmick.
However, it does make it technically it slightly inconveniences the developers. And if, you know, I'm no Interpol, I can't hunt them down, but one of my favorite things to do is slightly inconvenience people, just little needles, you know, like particularly if somebody sends me like a phishing attempt to get me to run some kind of executable that exfils data. well, they're going to get a lot more data than they were probably expecting.
You're gonna
So
DOS them with it.
no, I don't DOS them. I don't DOS them. What I do instead is I give them exactly what they want. They want credentials. I just submit a lot of credentials from a bunch of different values, and they have no idea which ones are legit and which ones aren't. And then it just makes, a little bit of an inconvenience on there.
And when a data exfiltration service starts running to exfiltrate the data, what you do is you just keep writing new files to a file system and deleting the old files. So
No. I rip the API calls, and then I just, there you go, just over and over and over. I don't flood it. I don't DOS it. I just slowly feed them data, and then they have to figure out which ones are legit and which ones aren't. And it just, it ruins their weekend maybe, but not much more than that. So for the recommendation, you don't have a whole lot to lose for it. Sure, why not inconvenience them? Then they have to figure out some other way to prevent their own systems from getting affected. So
there's been just kind of one thing that's prevented me from providing that as a recommendation, which is, again, initially someone would be like, why are you telling me to install a Russian language, right? And again, just kind of quirky, like, hey, you don't need to be, again, xenophobic or anything like that. You can install Russia on your computer. It's not gonna turn into its own malware, right? It's just a very, to your kind of point, it's like a Charlie Chaplin level of gimmick, right? It's like, oh, that was really funny and quirky there and witty, but how long is it going to really go on for is a really great question. But I had the biggest chuckle when I read that and I saw that. So that being noted, getting back to just some of the other elements we have. So I also have just a high level for anyone who's not familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, like 10,000 foot view perspective on just what it is, why it's important, some resources on it, how you can leverage it, some of the tools and content around it. But again, that's not this session. So can ransomware files be decrypted? In most cases, no. But in a lot of cases, sometimes you can. Yeah. It depends, right? It really depends on a couple different things. So most of the factors are, how well was that ransomware software actually developed, right? Did it employ weak cryptography algorithms? Did it employ a really strong, let's say, cryptography algorithm, but then they used like the same shared secret or key to encrypt everything? So it's kind of predictable, right? Or some other interesting weakness in that regard, right? And so there have been a set of decryption tools created. One of the things I've seen a lot of people do in the past is they will say, hey, just got hit with a ransomware attack. Can we decrypt these? And they'll start Googling around like the extension or the name of the ransom, like files or notes that they'll get on their computer, and then just randomly going through all these things on Google. What they don't realize is tons of those sites will say, hey, you download this will decrypt it, and this will decrypt it. They're just installing more like ransomware and they're more malware onto their systems. Don't do that, right? So I wanted to make sure I provided 3 trusted resources in that particular regard for folks, right? No More Ransom. They got not just ransomware decryptors there, but they also have some pretty good prevention tips and tricks and that kind of stuff. ID Ransomware and MSL. These are all free. They're all well known. They're all trusted, right? So there's no guarantee though. If you have something that gets cryptolockered, you're going to be able to decrypt it, but you can always check. And some of these, by the way, like no More Ransom can allow you to actually like upload it and all that kind of stuff. And you can easily search it and all that. So it is very neat. And it's fantastic that the community has come together to do these types of things, right? To help organizations out. But again, I would certainly not have this like as a line item in your incident response plan of like, okay, and when we get cryptolockered, this is our next step here. You hang your hat on it, you're going to probably have a very bad day, right? So just an important element there. And then lastly, hopeful ransomware prevention resources. Wanted to make sure that I provided this because there's so much out there. There are so many different guides. Honestly, CISA, NIST, FTC, CIS, ISA, they all got a lot of really good content and resources on it. I thought just kind of hyperlinking directly to those rather than beating a dead horse and repeating something. Like we have like, oh, here's the generic like top 10, kind of recommendations here. But if someone's looking to deep dive even further, particularly like CIS, a lot of their ransomware recommendations could then line up to
CISVA controls, right? And level 1 and implementation 2 and implementation 3 groups, right? So that's kind of what's neat about some of those other resources. So that being said, I know that I've covered quite a bit of ground here, and I want to just double check. Did we get any good questions? Let's go through here. The metaphor of colonoscopies and security DDQs is one of the most painful truths I've ever heard. Right, Mick? It is, certainly. But we appreciate you being a sport and going through it every single time. Okay. Somehow he knows what's coming. And then creating a run book, a good idea. Run book for
like the scene or SOAR, if you have like,
oh yeah,
100%.
yeah. And so one of the things that I'll say is, and maybe this is a future session, is a lot of organizations are under the impression that they have to buy all these really expensive commercial tools to have a security information event management system in place, to have a small security operations center. You really don't, right? That, like, I'm not going to say these open source tools don't have some, a bit of learning curve to them, right? And that they require a little bit more delicate, tender loving care when it comes to setting them up and maintaining them. But you can effectively do it all open source, all in-house with 1 or 2 guys, right? And so maybe a future session that we can do is setting up an entire open source security operations center, right? All the tools that are involved in the process, getting some data in there, and then looking at that data. I think that'll probably be a cute little session that we can kind of do in the future. Cool beans. Awesome. Any other good questions, concerns, thoughts, anything I'm missing here? Mick, thank you for some of these resources you provided in the beginning about ransomware with Korea hitting some healthcare organizations. Okay, cool. Good amount of coverage for tonight. Now, looking at our next couple sessions coming up, I believe one of the next sessions that we're going to have coming up is going to be a deep dive into cyber threat intelligence. Don't hold me 100% to that. I got to triple check on that one. I believe, I want to say Ryan, my boy's working on it. But again, we'll be putting that LinkedIn event out fairly soon, so you guys will get to see what's happening on the horizon with that one. And I also believe that my illustrious usual co-host, Travis, will be joining us next Wednesday as well. Now that, in regards to, family stuff and whatnot, all is copacetic there. So with that, team, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope everyone has a fantastic night. Thank you. Bye now.
See you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Guys.